Welcome back, everybody. I am Katarina Wallin-Bureau. I'm the managing partner of RISE, and I will tell you a little bit more about us in a little bit when we go into the session on climate action leadership in Europe. But before then, it is my great pleasure to introduce Bas Smets. Bas is a hugely accomplished landscape architect with a background in landscape architecture, civil engineering, and architecture. And he founded his firm in Brussels in 2007. He has since completed more than 50 projects in over 12 countries with his team of 20 architects and landscape architects. And these projects vary in scale from territorial visions to infrastructural landscapes, from large parks to private gardens, from city centers to film sets. Some of Bas and his team's projects include the park of Tour Taxi and the Saint-Gilles Plaza in Brussels, the public space around the Trinity Tower in Paris, La Défense, the Sunken Garden and Mandrake Hotel in London, the Himara waterfront in Albania, and recently the Parc des Ateliers in Arles, France. Each of these projects is part of interrelated research into the possible role and ambition of landscape projects. The aim is to invent augmented landscapes by using the logic of nature. These augmented landscapes produce a new microclimate while creating new atmospheres. And the collaboration between artists and scientists takes a really central role in this research. Bas recently won the project to reform the surroundings of Notre-Dame de Paris, in parallel to the reconstruction works that have been going on after the fire, and is creating a green oasis that connects the cathedral to the city and the Seine. This will increase vegetation by 30% and rethinks the iconic city spaces around the Notre-Dame as a series of climatic atmospheres. And as I'm saying this, Bas, and as I'm visualizing the green spaces you're going to create, I think about the conversation we had yesterday when Bas pointed out that everything is changing, and even what used to be something simple like planting a tree has become incredibly complicated because you don't know how long that tree can survive in its natural environment and in its soil. So can you use an indigenous species of tree, not knowing what the climate in that place will look like for the next 20, 30, 50, or 100 years? And I thought that really put today's discussions into a very poignant context in terms of how what used to be really simple acts are becoming more and more complex. So in 2008, Bas was awarded the biennial French Prize for Young Landscape Architects, Le Nouveau Album des Jeunes Architectes et des Paysagistes. In 2017, he was appointed General Commissioner for the Biennial of Architecture of Bordeaux. And in 2018, he received the award for urbanism and public space from the French Academy of Architecture. And Bas just told me that in addition, he's about to start teaching at Harvard. So the list of accomplishments is very long. Bas is going to inspire us by talking about using technology to reimagine urban landscapes into climate-smart landscapes. So Bas, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Let's write this up. So I'm a landscape architect, and I make landscapes. And I try to make these landscapes climate resilient. So we mostly work in cities, and we try to rethink our city as an urban ecology, because the biggest change we can make is in cities. And if all cities change at the same time, we can have a global planetary impact. I'd like to start with this image designed by Alexander von Humboldt in 1800. Alexander von Humboldt, who went to explore the Americas, exploring natural environments and trying to understand how they work, what systemic value lies behind them. And he would take technology with him, air temperature, air pressure, also a machine to calculate the blueness of the sky, because he thought at that moment that was an important parameter. And you can see in the columns on the left and on the right, he would write down all his observations, trying to understand the relationship between things. And in that sense, he is really the father of the invention of the biosphere, of understanding how this living layer held by gravity functions. And I really like his sketches and his designs because he invents a new way of speaking about science. One back. And I like all these little sketches, and we call this a designerly way of thinking, like really through design, through drawings, trying to understand how things work. And we operate in quite a similar way, trying to go not into a natural environment, but we go into a man-made environment, an artificial environment that we try to read as a sequence of microclimates. Because in the end, a city made by man is nothing else than an artificial environment out of which we push nature out, and we're trying to bring that nature back in. But we don't try to go back to what was before. We try to understand the man-made environment as a new nature, trying to understand what kind of species, what kind of logics of nature can work in that artificial environment. And I would like to show you 3 projects going from 40 square meters to 4,000 square meters to 40,000 square meters, showing how we try to bring back nature in that artificial environment that we create and that we expand on the globe. First project in London, in Westminster City, so right in the center of London, a sunken garden or a sunken courtyard 4 by 8 meters, so not more than about this space, in which a client wanted me to make a luxurious garden. It was a damp courtyard, all in stone. Here, when I visited the first time, they were redoing the facades around it. And I thought there's a kind of a strange microclimate there, protected from the sun with the surrounding facades, but also protected from the wind, a bit damp, as I said, the moisture of London. And I asked the contractor that was renovating the facades to take temperature both inside the courtyard and outside on the street. And we found out that there was about a 4-degree difference between the street and the courtyard. So a microclimate made by buildings. There was also some kind of heat loss, of course, from the surrounding facades. And so we took the risk to imagine that it would never freeze in that garden, which hugely changes the type of trees that you can plant. We went further in our analysis of this microclimate, and we found out that it's very close to the understory of a subtropical forest. In the shade, no wind, quite a lot of moisture. The only difference is it was, of course, a bit lower in temperature than a subtropical area, but quite different. So we brought in these tree ferns from New Zealand, which, of course, is not indigenous to London, but are perfectly indigenous to the microclimate of that courtyard. We craned them in, and we planted these trees about 12 years ago. And today, I've been told they're one of the tallest tree ferns of the UK, about 5 to 6 meters high. You can see they are contrasted by an artwork by Frans West. And then in going further into the climate, we found out that these ferns prefer moisture rather than rain. And so instead of putting a dripping system, we put in a misting system. So every hour there's 1 minute of mist. Since there's no wind, it stays there. And when you enter that garden, that's again only 4 by 8 meters big, you feel you're entering a documentary by National Geographic. So here you see before, and here you see after, with the mist hanging there underneath the ferns. So in a way, we responded to the microclimate of that site, step 1. Step 2, Paris, 4,000 square meters. A developer found a way of making about 1,000 micro foundations along an urban boulevard that enters into the esplanade of La Défense, which lies about 8 meters higher than the ground level. And he asked me if he found the foundations are put on either side of this urban boulevard. He asked me to imagine a landscape or a public plaza connecting the esplanade with the lower lying city level around a new skyscraper that you can see here in construction. So a total artificial environment on a bridge structure surrounded by all these tall buildings. And it made me think, well, it made me think of the mountains. Because in the end, the glass facades are reflecting like glaciers. Everything is stone. The only thing that was missing was this tree line. You know, the tree line that helps you get a reference on where you are when you're walking in the mountains. So I thought, can I not make a tree line on this platform? Can I not try to plant as many trees as possible on this new bridge structure? Of course, many years, or at least 2 years of discussions with the structural engineer to make sure I can have enough planting medium. That, of course, means weight, and weight means, of course, more cost. But we succeeded in imagining this whole man-made environment as related to a natural environment by this implementation of these trees. At the same time, I thought the staircases could be like avalanches of stone dripping down or flowing down towards a lower level. So here you see an abstract isometric view of this stony landscape flowing down the hill, and with these trees creating a microclimate, blocking the wind, bringing in other smell, bringing in colors, sound, and attracting back the birds. And so we went about as if it was a natural landscape, as if it was a new nature, looking at all the surface of where we could plant trees, and then imagining or projecting all the areas where we could not plant. For example, the beams, the fire truck access, the disabled access. And so we did an overlay of all the non-plantable zones to understand where we could plant, and then through a computer programming, looked at the biggest density of trees possible. So we planted about 50 trees on this platform that we planted in only 55 centimeters of soil, but soil on 4,000 square meters. So I have about 2,000 cubic meters of soil in which these trees can grow. Then we trained the trees in a tree nursery for 3 years to have flat root balls, so they could perfectly adapt in that situation. And then since of course it needed to be a hardscape because there's so many people passing by, we looked at ways to understand the need for water in that shallow soil. We worked with a French startup called Urbasens to insert tensiometric probes. So basically calculating the water pressure in the earth to know where the roots are. And when you know where the roots are, you know where to water and how much to water. And through the system, this big, not so sophisticated technology, we could lower the amount of water by 2. So here you see the real section, only 55 centimeters of soil, as you can see here. That's not compacted since the slabs are put on these concrete columns, and in which these trees can freely grow using the whole surface, which is essential. The canopy volume equals the volume that the roots have in the soil. So the more soil you have, the bigger your tree grows. It's like a bonsai. You put your plant in a bigger pot, the plant becomes bigger. You can see our mountain stones. This is granite coming from Brittany in France. And it creates quite an abstract landscape. All the joints are open, so all the rainwater goes to the planting medium, and we hardly need to, so we measure the need for water, but we hardly need to add any water for these plants that use all the rainwater captured through these open joints. So in the end, a lot of work to make it very abstract and to bring in as many trees as possible, as you can see here. So this was planted about 2 years ago. Give it 2-3 more years, and we will have a continuous canopy creating this tree line in the dense city fabric of La Défense. From this project, I go to the south of France, to Arles, 40,000 square meters, and every project becomes more complex, more difficult to make. Here we're working on a former rail yard where locomotives used to be made, a site made in the 19th century, 1848. With dynamite, they made a perfectly horizontal site in the bedrock. And of course, since it was dug out of the bedrock, there was no earth and no soil, no water, so no spontaneous vegetation, or hardly any spontaneous vegetation after the activities had been stopped in the 1980s. And here, the Luma Foundation of Maya Hoffman intended to make a new center for the production of art, and she asked me to make a park for the citizens of the city of Arles. And I thought, before making a park, I need to change the climate. So we measured the climate, and this climate was exactly a semi-desert climate. The hot sun in the summer, the cold wind from the Mistral in the winter. Very, very tough climatic conditions. So you see the industrial wasteland with no vegetation at all. The Rencontre, which is a photo festival, would be held there each year, and you would go from one venue to the other, and just walking 2 minutes in the sun, you would have a headache. So it was really the first question is how to change this microclimate. And we thought, let's look at what happens around the city. And we found a very, very rich bioregion with, as you can see here, the Alpi, which is the southern brand of the Alps. I'm having a hard time clicking this thing. Underneath it, you see the Crau, which is an old floodplain of a glacier, and on the left side, you see the Camargue, which is the estuary plain of the Rhône entering the Mediterranean. So in a sense, from the very humid Camargue to the very stony and dry Alpi, we had all planned strategies of the region around our site. So we thought, can we not use that logic? Can we use those plans to create this new climate, to transform the semi-desert into a Mediterranean climate? And then, of course, how do you give form to this radical change? We thought, let's look what nature would have done. I told you about the Mistral winds coming from the north. We thought over time they would bring sediments and they would create a topography. We even thought that the winds coming down from the new central tower designed by Frank Gehry would fall down, carve out a little pond that you see in the center here, and then create a dune-like landscape. Once we have this topography and we have our pond, we have different climatic and environments. So we could imagine what kind of vegetation would grow where. You can see on this image. And then we looked at a section, because since we had to build up on top of the rocks, we basically had to rethink everything from an aquifer, artificial aquifer that stores the rainwater, to the buildup of the soil composition, to the sequencing of the plants. So as you can see here, what we dug out, we used to create our topography. And then we really looked at the depth of soil we had. You can see here to bring these plants. And this gives an interesting climatic section, because the wind is coming from the north, so towards the north you have a soft slope. In the summer you can sit there protected from the sun by the shade of the trees. While in winter you could walk on the other side in the sun, protected from the wind by those same trees. So you had a kind of asymmetrical climatic section in summer and in winter. And here you can see the ecological sequence happening with the depth of soil. So you have pioneer trees growing in shallow soil. The more you have soil, the more you advance in time, because the more you have an accumulated sedimentation. So in a sense, when you go to the pine tree, 200 years have passed. And so when you walk in the park, there's a new space-time relationship. The more you walk towards a hill, the more you go further in time. And this was the whole idea, was not going back into time, but faster into the future, using what nature would have done, but in an accelerated way. The water comes from an adjacent canal. I'll spare you the technical details, but we had to rethink how to make a soil and how to retain rainwater on site. And then we worked with Transsolar, a company in Germany specialized in climate engineering, and we worked on what's called the UTCI, Universal Thermal Climate Index, which is the perceived temperature, which is not only temperature, but also humidity, also radiation, air velocity, and so all these elements together gives you the temperature you feel as a human being. And we worked on that, seeing that in summer we want the wind to come to you, while in winter you want to block it. You can use humidity to lower the temperature. And so from this existing situation that you can see here, we go to this situation, the pond. We planted 80,000 plants, 140 different species, and we calculated the difference in perceived temperature from 13% comfortable time on a July day, we go to 65%. And if there's a little breeze, we even go to 77%. So again, the whole idea of making landscapes not just as an aesthetical thing, but as a necessary way of reducing temperature in our cities. And a whole hydraulical scheme, since again we're on the bedrock, so there's no water, to bring the water from an adjacent canal into a filtering system, open air, using reeds to clean the water, storing the water underground, and then using it to irrigate the plants. All this monitored by about 60 probes. For every 10 trees, we follow one tree to see how its roots are developing. These probes give us a weekly report. And so in a sense, we know exactly where the roots are. We know exactly how this organism is developing. And that's quite new to use this at this scale. And I think in the future we'll rely on this even more, because again, the more our cities become artificial, the more we need to find a way to bring nature back in those man-made environments. I'll show you some more pictures. So this was before. The picture taken was in front of that square building. See if you can get me after. Well, I'll do it again. So a radical change through the use of plants. And today in summer, the park is filled with people, filled with kids playing on the lawn, and people walking on those paths, again formed by the wind, formed by what nature would have done. Some last images to show you how quickly nature can come back, and how quickly animals come back as well. We've been calculating the number of birds, the number of fish, the number of animal life in the earth, and we have had 36 species spotted on site that hadn't been there before. So now we're going to do a whole program with putting bird nests on the side. And so in a sense, when you bring back vegetation, animal life follows very quickly. So it's in a sense also a message of hope in a world where we're more and more destroying natural habitats, that we can help nature come back as well. I think I'm at the end of my slides, but I would like to end with two little videos. Let me just see if I could get the last one. A bit naive, but this again, the best climate machine we have today is still a tree. And so we have to think how we can bring those trees back and more into the cities, because the trees is maybe the only living organism that makes the connection between the soil, the geology, and the air, the meteorology. And so this image to show you that we have to rethink our cities as what I call a biospheric urbanism as the interface between a changing meteorology and the geology that we need to use more. We need to bring that water back into the soil. We cannot just make this impermeable layer on top of our cities. And the last little video is a kind of maybe, since you guys are all the tech guys, a kind of hope we have. These are the trees of Brussels. And a tree is, in the end, the most sensible probe you can imagine. A tree knows the air quality, it knows the rain, it knows the vibrations in the soil. So if we could tap into that knowledge of a tree, and we could link those trees, we could create what I call an urban tree network that would give us in real time the exact situation and condition of our microclimates in our cities. Thank you so much.
Can you hear me? Inspirational. No, yes, we have time for just one or two questions. One there.
Thank you. Great presentation, and as you said, hopeful science. You were talking about Arles and an industrial site. How were you dealing with contamination of the soil? Because at the end you talk about some purification system for water, but did you have more serious issues to deal with on this site?
The SNCF, so the French railroad company, had the obligation of decontaminating the site. So the biggest contamination was gone, and to the acceptable levels, but we could still, for example, not plant fruit trees. So we were obliged only to stay with trees that did not provide food. And then the water, we clean it ourselves. It comes from the Durance, and it has a good quality, but I want to clean it to make sure that if ever the water gets in a worse state, that we can make our own cleaning system.
One more question if there's one, and then...
Thanks. Yeah, great presentation. I would like to ask you about the new site area in Antwerp your bureau designed. What was the concept? It's near the river, so it was quite a special place, and it's very nice.
Thank you. Nieuw-Zuid in Antwerp is the extension of the city towards the south, and there we had two main goals. The first one was every drop of water that falls on the site stays on the site. So we have these open ditches along the buildings that end in a topography, we call it wadi in Dutch, that allows you to take up all the rainwater, to have it infiltrate back into the ground or evaporate into the air. And the second thing was we wanted to have a zero balance of a earth movement. So all the earth excavated for the cellars of the buildings are reused in this berm landscape that also blocks the sound from the freeway. So those were two main elements, and then we tried to bring back many trees. We planted more than 1,000 trees, a bit like in Arles, fast-growing trees, pioneer trees, slower-growing trees, to create this new green environment.
Thank you so much, Bas.